Have you been a victim of your Jeep's headlights not flipping on?
Has this ever happened to you?
How about needing to diddle the stalk a little bit to make the regular beams work, but the day comes where only your high beams stay on, or any other lighting acting weird? So you do a bunch of research on what part fixes that and find that there's a few different kinds, so you do more research on which one's actually best and install it step by step, only to find that the connector was bad and wonder what to do then, but that doesn't end up fixing the problem? So then all you want is for someone to just show you everything that can go wrong in one video, so you don't just throw more parts at it without knowing what your actual issue is?
Has that ever happened to you?
Well, it happened to me, and in this video, I'll take you A to Z in replacing my Cherokee's headlight switch and what else there might be to actually fixing your issue, starting with which switch to choose, but also how to replace its connector if that's your problem, what else to check on before throwing the wrong parts at it, or at least making sure you've got everything you need in one Amazon delivery, and then putting it all back together. I'll link everything I needed down below, but this will be like a choose-your-own-adventure type deal. I put chapters at the bottom to get you where you need to be, since there may be more to this than just a bad switch. This channel's dedicated to making XJs better, so if you're about that life, you found the right one. Now let's fix your lighting problem. First things first, let's get your switch ordered. What we want is the best endurance possible against what causes their failure in the first place, heat management and wear. Because from the factory, this switch gets full headlamp current at its connector. And it's why aftermarket harnesses with relays are so popular, they take that load off. So if you've got one already, check that first, since it's an easy failure point to rule out early. So especially if your harness is stock, we want a switch with the best chance of withstanding the excessive current it's going to get. Now a Mopar one's ideal, but with all the luxuries that capitalism affords this fine country of ours, new old stock Mopar anything at a reasonable price isn't one of them. These will all have what's called a bimetallic thermal breaker inside that bends when it gets too hot to open and protect the circuit, preventing damage. But let's just pick the best switch on the design merits we can actually see, starting with this standard brand, which at first glance looks a lot like the Mopar. But how these work is that round cam piece rotates when you turn your interior lights up or down, and that wiper drags against this series of contact patches. We see some glops of grease there to reduce that friction and oxidation. Prongs themselves look good, the copper plating looks relatively good quality, but TRQs on the other hand, we get a thicker cam piece here that almost feels ceramic, so at first glance a more robust design decision and what we want out of a part that gets so much current. Even the contact philosophy seems more consistent and straightforward. That wiper just scrapes across this coil all the way around. However, the most problematic heat exchange happens at the connector this switch mates to, and TRQ seem to cost cut at these prongs. This contact patch will also see a ton of heat, and TRQ's is a lot more acute than the standards. It audibly rakes across that non-greased coil, and over years of repetitions, this thing's destined to wear out faster. Compare that to the OEM-style wiping action on a flat contact patch that's lubed up from the factory. Switch number 3 here is the standard T-Series, and it's got all the same proven OEM design choices we've been talking about, and it's the best price out of the bunch by at least $10. Now T-Series is standard's economy line, but the only cost cut I see here is the plating on the external housing being different, and since that doesn't matter at all in this use case, this is the part I recommend. Pair it with a relayed harness upstream, and we've done all we can to fortify this whole lighting system. Now let's get this bad girl in. For install, it's always a good idea to disconnect the battery, since the switch's connector has terminals that carry residual voltage, and we want to break that path to avoid any chance of shorting anything. Hook around the center bezel's bottom corners and pull it away to get to these 4 screws we need to take out first. Just note the type of screws so you put the right ones back to not mess up the existing threads in the plastic. This plate needs to come down to give us access to where we'll be working, and it's 2 screws at the bottom that frees that panel to be pulled straight out one side at a time via the retaining clips that slot into the holes on both sides. Metal plate's held by 2 screws up top here by those holes and slots into the plastic crossmember at the bottom, so let it down easy before unscrewing it completely. It'll hit you in the face if you don't. Just take note how this steering column dust boot fits back together for later. It slides apart and it'll come off with the whole dash piece here, but the switch knob has to come out before that happens. There's a button on the switch itself that holds on to the knob's plunger. It'll be pointing to the passenger side, so feel around for it up there, kind of like that one time at band camp, and the switch will eventually let go of the knob itself. It might just take some pushing and pulling before it lets you have it. But with the knob out of the way, the dash piece is only held on by plastic notches, so just grab both sides at that seam, pull it back, and tip it toward you as you lift it up and out. And adjusting the steering column all the way down will make it easier. Now it's just removing this retaining screw and the switch will be free to fish out. You just kind of have to diddle it around back there until it falls down. Really no better way to put that, just try to recreate the path mine took on its way out. Remove the little ground connector from this outer tab, and the connector holds onto the switch with two thick clips. Just carefully get under those with something and start rocking it back and forth, and the switch will eventually let go. The connector was torched, and I was guilty of the sin of thinking this common XJ problem didn't apply to me and not being prepared for it. This is the part of the video where I show you how to go by rectifying this situation, but if you got to this point and your connector looked great, consider yourself lucky and skip right to the headlight switch install in the chapters below. But if you're in my boat, I'll show you how we can go about this since there's a few different approaches we can take. We'll need to cut this connector out and source another one, be that someone else's Mopar one or an OEM style replacement. And luckily, Dorman's got one on Amazon. I really needed this quick. I'll link the one I got on the screen here. The wires are actually slightly thicker than stock, which is a rare and pleasant surprise. But here are our options for install. This harness sees a lot of action and vibration, so we want these joints sturdy. We can use these solder seal connectors I honestly love using, super satisfying and should do fine in this application. We could delete the connector and spade connect to the terminals. It's easier, just not as future-proof, although great in a pinch. But I decided to go full tilt and solder the connections because I could use the practice and I'm a glutton for punishment. I'll link all you need for however you choose to tackle this below. Now I'm a novice at soldering, so I won't be taking us through those motions. There's a ton of better tutorials out there already, but it's a tight spot here. Expect to get creative, especially if you don't have an extra set of hands. I suggest picking up some zip ties to help stabilize things because this is an awkward spot with some tough angles. Luckily, the wires were cold enough to do some of that work for me. Just match up the wires using their positions on the old connector to make sure you're splicing the right ones. The colors didn't perfectly match, so I cut and spliced one wire at a time to be sure. Now your replacement connector pigtail might have single wires that correspond to doubled up stock ones, so just splice those together like you see there, and there are 3 of these in the Dorman. But just take your time making these joints as sturdy as you can. Mine look pretty gnarly, roast me if you want in the comments, but sticks and stones will break my bones, but what's invisible behind the dash can never hurt me. But now that the connector's wired in, we can test our new switch. We want to make sure that everything works before putting everything back together. So let's see if we're ready to roll here. Welcome back to Mission Select. If your headlights turned on, you're in the home stretch. You can skip to the switch install chapter now where I give you some pointers other videos miss, but if they didn't, I'll show you what else I checked and fixed. There's a few other things we'll obviously want to rule out. One is the headlight connector itself and the prongs in the housing looking for melts or major corrosion. One of these multimeters will help you make sure that the connector terminals themselves are getting the power they need. Just jam the red prong into each terminal as you ground the black one to bare metal, and that'll determine if you need to start checking other sections of harness for damage. Just take a look around. I found this inline fuse wire on mine hanging by a thread and heavily corroded. So out that went for a much more robust one that actually has some water resistance and won't let go like the other. I paired it with the new ring terminal and we'll be good to go. All this takes is lopping off the corroded end from the harness, stripping the harness and fuse holder ends, and joining those however you see fit. But you wouldn't want to just butt connect wiring here. This area sees a lot of heat and vibration, but this could be another great job for those solder seals from before if you don't have an iron. They are much easier to work with, but I just opted to solder. And obligatory lume up here bumps up the aesthetic, but don't forget to grease up the ring terminals and clean off any others before you put them all back. So now that that part of the harness is sorted, let's check out the rest, because we're still looking for any visual cues for damage or corrosion. These are the high and low beam relays on my harness.
Stop. Can you enhance it?
Hold on a second, I'll enhance it.
That little wavy edge on the relay connector can only mean one thing, and that's a burnt up terminal. Yeah, that's not good. Whether we can chalk this up to a loose relay connection, a bad relay in general, or any combo of factors, we obviously don't want to run this connector for much longer, but I also can't bear to drive to work like this one more time. A new relay was my last hope, so I picked one up, dropped it in, reconnected the battery, and hoped for the best testing our new switch again. A new headlight harness is in the mail to rectify that situation, but while I regret not checking the most accessible failure point first, I'm reminded that it's really about the friends I met along the way, the 3 or 4 other time bombs I couldn't see and wouldn't have addressed if I just replaced that relay. The payoff here is working lights, sure, but also a system that's now sorted from top to bottom. So let's put a fork in this and get the dash closed up, and I'll walk you through it since it's a little tougher getting this switch in than out. We want to prep the switch's terminals with some dielectric grease for some corrosion protection, just a couple dabby poos of that. Line up those pins and send them home. It might take some force, but you'll hear the clip set, and as long as both are in, you're good. The grease will protect any exposed copper you might see. And don't forget to clip that small ground connector and double check it because it likes to jump out on its way into the dash. Now the switch's hole and the dashes need to line up when it's mounted, and once it's up there, this bolt needs to thread all the way into the switch. You're going to be tempted to force the first few threads, just fight that urge when it comes because it'll take some fidgeting getting this lined up. So this is the path that worked for me. I'll slow it down a little, starting with the wires angled down. We want the broad side of the plate with that little button facing the passenger side. I was able to adjust and rotate it once it was in there with the other hand through that opening on the left there. When you see that hole through the dash bracket, it's time to line up that retaining bolt. Just don't bottom it out before making sure that the switch itself is aligned properly. Just feel for that button and get it pointing 90 degrees before snugging it up. After adjusting the wheel all the way down to give you the space you need to reinstall the shroud, you wrap the dust boot around the column, you tip the whole piece toward you and lower it into position. Get it lined up with the seam, give it a couple love taps, and you'll know it's in position when the mounting screw holes and slots are lined up. Just remember to use the same type of screw that was in there before to keep those plastic threads intact and not add dash rattles that weren't already there. I must have done this a while back because this guy just spins, but we'll keep him around, he's doing his best. With that shroud on, send the pull knob all the way back home using the button on the switch, you should feel it catch. Link up that dust boot under the column and install the metal plate bottom tabs first into the plastic cross member before putting in its upper mounting screws. Followed by our plastic panel piece, retaining clips first. Those will click into place and then we can close it up at the bottom with the 2 screws. Pulling the brake and putting the shifter in neutral gives the center bezel more room and I find it goes in best low to high. I get a ton of questions on this head unit, so I'll link my interior video up top where I review it. But ladies and gentlemen, that is more like it. These Holley Retro Brights are the best lights I've ever had and they're finally cooking again. Anyway, if this video helped you or just to let me know how I'm doing, drop a comment and subscribe if you want more XJ fix and upgrade content. Hit my Best of XJ Amazon storefront where I put everything I use in, on, and around mine to make it all it can be. It helps fund the channel and connect the squad with what the XJ community actually has success with. Thanks again, everyone.